Welcome. Welcome to today's teaching. Let's see what Moses has for us in Deuteronomy 13. We'll jump straight into it. Deuteronomy 13, verse 1. If there arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and giveth thee a sign or a wonder. Let's take it line by line. If there arise among you. Notice where the prophet appears. Not outside. Among you. Within your midst. Within your community. Within your awareness. Within your consciousness. This is important because some of the most influential voices in our lives do not come from outside. They arise from within. Thoughts, ideas, beliefs, desires, assumptions, and inner narratives. Let's look at the prophet. A prophet is not merely someone who predicts the future. A prophet is one who speaks a message, one who presents a vision, one who points consciousness in a particular direction. Symbolically, a prophet can represent an idea, a belief, a philosophy, a worldview, or an inner voice, something attempting to guide your awareness. Everyday life example. Every day, prophets arise within us. You may hear, you are not good enough. You will never succeed. Nobody cares about you. Give up. Those messages are prophesying a future. They are attempting to direct consciousness. The question becomes, should they be believed? Next, a dreamer of dreams. Dreams often symbolize visions, possibilities, imaginations, or future projections. A dreamer of dreams can represent any thought system, offering a vision of reality. Not all visions are true. Not all dreams are healthy. Not all ideas lead to life. Career example. Someone may dream, if I become successful, then I'll finally be happy. The dream sounds attractive. The vision sounds compelling. Years later, they discover success did not solve the deeper issue. The dream was incomplete. Relationship example. A person imagines, if I can just find the perfect partner, all my problems will disappear. The dream becomes a prophecy. The relationship arrives. The internal struggles remain. The dream misled them. Next, and giveth thee a sign or a wonder. Now the verse becomes fascinating. The prophet produces evidence, something convincing, something impressive, something that appears real. This is crucial because deception rarely arrives looking obviously false. It arrives looking convincing. Social media example. Someone presents impressive statistics, edited videos, persuasive arguments, and emotional stories. Everything appears convincing. The sign is real. The wonder is real. The presentation is powerful. But the question remains, where is this leading consciousness? Spiritual example. Many people assume if something is impressive, it must be true. Yet, throughout scripture, signs alone are never the test. The question is not, was it impressive? The question is, what direction does it lead you? Relatable example. Think about scams. Many scams work because they contain real signs, real evidence, real documents, real websites, real testimonials. The signs look convincing. The appearance looks convincing, yet the destination is deception. Christ consciousness and discernment. This is why discernment becomes so important. Awakened consciousness does not ask merely, is this impressive? It asks, is this true? Where is this leading me? What fruit will this produce? The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, not every voice, idea, belief, or vision that appears convincing is worthy of being followed. Some ideas arrive with evidence. Some beliefs arrive with powerful experiences. Some voices arrive with compelling signs. But the true test is not whether something impresses us. The true test is, what is this leading me toward? Because consciousness is constantly encountering prophets, constantly encountering dreams, constantly encountering visions of reality. And wisdom begins by learning that a convincing sign is not always the same thing as truth. Next, and the sign or the wonder come to pass, whereof he spoke unto thee, saying, let us go after other gods, which thou hast not known, and let us serve them. Now the passage becomes extremely interesting. Notice what Moses says. The sign worked. The wonder happened. The prediction came true. The evidence appeared. The experience was real. Yet, despite all of that, the warning remains. Why? Because truth is not determined merely by results. The sign came to pass. This is profound. The prophet was not obviously wrong. The event actually happened. The evidence appeared convincing. The experience felt real. The outcome seemed to validate the message. Yet Moses says, be careful. Why? Because something can appear successful and still lead consciousness away from truth. Career example. Someone says, lie on your resume. You do it and it works. You get the job. The sign came to pass. The result happened. The strategy appeared successful. But did it lead consciousness toward integrity or away from it? Relationship example. Someone says, manipulate people and you will get what you want. You do it and it works. You get attention. You get validation. You get influence. The sign came to pass. The strategy produced results. But where is it leading you? Next line. Let us go after other gods. Now we arrive at one of the most important symbols in Scripture. What is a god? Within the symbolic framework we've been using, a god is whatever governs consciousness, whatever sits on the throne, whatever becomes the highest authority in your life, whatever ultimately directs your choices. Examples of modern gods. Many people hear God and think only of statues. But modern gods can be money, status, approval, ideology, fear, politics, religion, success, or ego. Anything that governs consciousness becomes a god in the symbolic sense. Career example. Someone says, your worth comes from your job title. Now success becomes God. Identity becomes attached to position. The person lives for achievement. The God is no longer truth. The God is status. Relationship example. Someone says, your value depends on whether someone chooses you. Now approval becomes God. The person sacrifices authenticity for acceptance. The throne has shifted. Social media example. Someone starts creating content to help people. Then views arrive. Followers arrive. Recognition arrives. Gradually, the mission changes. Now everything revolves around clicks, engagement, and attention. The God has changed. The throne has changed. The content creator may not even realize it, which thou hast not known. This is fascinating. The new God is unfamiliar, unproven, unexamined. It promises something attractive, yet consciousness has no real relationship with it, no real understanding of it. Relatable example. People often chase things because society tells them this will make you happy. Money, fame, status, recognition. Years later, they discover, I never actually examined whether this was worthy of governing my life. Next line, let us serve them. Notice the progression. First, believe, then follow, then serve. Whatever sits on the throne eventually receives service, time, attention, energy, focus, devotion. Spiritual example. A person may begin seeking truth, then gradually become attached to being right, winning debates, defending doctrine, and proving others wrong. The original pursuit was truth. The new God is ego. The service has shifted. Why this verse is so important? Moses is teaching something remarkable. A successful outcome is not automatically proof of truth. Something can work and still be unhealthy. Something can succeed and still mislead. Something can produce results and still lead consciousness away from life. Modern example. Many influencers become wealthy, teaching manipulation, exploitation, dishonesty, and greed. The sign came to pass. The money arrived. The success arrived. The results are visible. But Moses asked, what God is this serving? What is sitting on the throne? What is consciousness becoming devoted to? Christ consciousness and the one God. God represents truth, ultimate reality, the source, the highest awareness. Anything that attempts to take that place becomes an other god. Not because it is necessarily evil, but because it was never meant to occupy the throne. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, not every successful idea deserves your devotion. Not every result deserves your worship. Not every achievement deserves the throne. Not every voice deserves your obedience. Because the greatest danger is not always failure. Sometimes the greatest danger is success that slowly persuades consciousness to serve something unworthy of the throne. And that is exactly why Moses is about to say in the next verse, even if the sign worked, do not follow the voice if it leads consciousness away from truth. Verse 3, thou shalt not hearken unto the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God proveth you, to know whether ye love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. This verse contains one of the deepest spiritual principles in all of Deuteronomy. Because notice, the sign worked. The wonder happened. The evidence appeared. The experience felt real. And yet, Moses says, do not listen. Why? Because truth is being tested at a deeper level. Thou shalt not hearken. To hearken means listen, give attention to, follow, obey, or internalize. Notice, the focus is not merely hearing the voice. We hear thousands of voices every day. The issue is, which voice receives authority? Which voice gets to govern consciousness? Everyday life example. A thought arises. You are a failure. You hear it. The question is, will you hearken to it? Will you build your identity around it? Will you let it sit on the throne? Many thoughts arise. Not all deserve authority. Next line. The Lord your God proveth you. Most people imagine a test as, can I avoid failure? But Moses presents a different kind of test. The test is, what do you truly love? What truly governs you? What sits on the throne when something attractive competes for your attention? Career example. Imagine you are offered a promotion. The catch: you must compromise your integrity. The promotion is real. The money is real. The opportunity is real. The sign came to pass. The question becomes, what do you love more? Truth or advancement? Relationship example. A person enters your life offering attention, validation, and excitement. But accepting it would require betraying someone who trusts you. The opportunity is real. The attraction is real. The question becomes, what governs consciousness? Next line, to know whether you love the Lord. The Lord represents truth, reality, the highest awareness, the source, what is ultimately real. The test is not, do you believe in truth? The test is, do you love truth enough to remain faithful to it when something more attractive appears? Social media example. Someone discovers that outrage gets more views. Controversy gets more clicks. Sensationalism grows faster. The signs are real. The results are real. The numbers prove it. The question becomes, do I love truth or do I love attention? Spiritual example. A person begins seeking truth, then discovers they can gain followers, influence, admiration, and authority by telling people what they want to hear. The temptation is real. The opportunity is real. The test becomes, am I serving truth or am I serving applause? With all your heart. The heart often symbolizes desire, affection, intention, and motivation. What does consciousness genuinely desire? What does it truly love? Not what it claims to love, but what it consistently chooses. Next line, with all your soul. The soul represents inner life, identity, being, awareness. This is total alignment, not partial devotion, not occasional commitment, but a deep orientation toward truth. The test is not the sign. Most people focus on the sign. Moses focuses on the response. The miracle is not the test. The success is not the test. The opportunity is not the test. The test is what happens inside consciousness when the opportunity arrives. Christ consciousness and devotion to truth. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly chooses truth over popularity, power, approval, and safety. The Christ principle remains aligned with truth, even when alternatives appear attractive. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, life continually reveals what truly sits on the throne of consciousness. Do you love truth when truth costs something? Do you love integrity when compromise is rewarded? Do you love reality when illusion is attractive? Do you love wisdom when ego offers applause? Because every sign, every opportunity, every success, every temptation eventually reveals what consciousness is truly devoted to. And that is the test Moses is describing. Verse 4. Ye shall walk after the Lord your God, and fear him, and keep his commandments, and obey his voice, and ye shall serve him, and cleave unto him. After warning about voices that can pull consciousness away from truth, Moses now describes the alternative. In other words, if you are not to follow every prophet, every dream, every sign, every attractive voice, then what should you follow? This verse answers that question. Ye shall walk after the Lord. Notice the word walk. This is not merely belief, not merely agreement, not merely doctrine. Walking implies living, practicing, embodying, moving in a direction. Throughout scripture, walking often symbolizes the path consciousness travels, the journey itself. Everyday life example. Many people say, I value honesty. But walking after honesty means actually living honestly when dishonesty would be easier. Walking is lived truth, not spoken truth. Be ye doers of the word, not hearers only, thereby deceiving your own selves. Walking is lived truth. The Lord represents truth, reality, the highest awareness, the governing principle of life, the source. The command becomes, let truth govern your path. Not fear, not ego, not approval, not status, but truth. Next, fear him. This is one of the most misunderstood words in scripture. People often interpret fear as terror. But notice something. Would Moses really be saying, walk with God, serve God, cleave to God, and be terrified of God? That doesn't fit the flow. Symbolically, Fear here can be understood as reverence, respect, deep recognition, awareness of consequence. The same way you respect gravity, you don't hate gravity, you recognize its reality. Career example: a good analyst respects data. If the data reveals something uncomfortable, they follow the evidence. That is a form of reverence for truth. Keep his commandments. Commandments are not merely rules. They are principles aligned with reality. Principles that help consciousness remain connected to truth. The commandments become guides for awakened living. That's why they come after the Exodus, after the movement, after the liberation, after the awakening comes the commandments, because they are guides for awakened living. All of them. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all the laws you see, they look like laws literally. But when you decode them symbolically, they are guides for awakened living. It's telling you how to live now that you have awakened, so you can reflect the Father, so you can reflect the source. Because that is why we are here, to reflect the source, for the Father to be seen in us. Next, obey his voice. Earlier, we saw prophets, dreamers, and signs. Now Moses says, learn to recognize the voice worth following. Spiritual example: many voices compete for attention, fear, pride, insecurity, ego, approval, and truth. The question becomes, which voice governs consciousness? Everyday example: a person makes a mistake. One voice says, hide it. Another says, own it. One voice says, protect your image. Another says, tell the truth. Which voice receives obedience? Next, serve him. Whatever sits on the throne eventually receives service. People serve money, status, attention, ideology, relationships, and careers through the investment of time, energy, focus, and devotion. The question is not, do you serve something? The question is, what are you serving? Social media example: many creators begin by serving a purpose, then gradually begin serving metrics. Views become God. Engagement becomes God. Approval becomes God. Service shifts. the throne shifts. Next, cleave unto him. To cleave means remain joined, remain connected, remain attached. Even when alternatives appear, even when distractions arise, even when other voices compete. Relationship example. A healthy relationship survives, not because alternatives never appear. It survives because commitment remains. The same principle appears here. Truth remains the commitment. This verse is describing an integrated consciousness. A consciousness that walks in truth, respects truth, follows truth, serves truth, remains joined to truth. Not occasionally, consistently. Christ consciousness and union. Christ consciousness is not merely believing something, it is union with truth, alignment with reality, walking in harmony with the source. The deeper meaning, the verse is saying, allow truth to become the governing principle of your consciousness. Walk in it. Listen to it. Serve it. Remain joined to it. Because many voices will arise. Many signs will appear. Many dreams will compete for your attention. But awakening begins when consciousness learns to distinguish between what is merely attractive and what is ultimately true. And Moses is saying, when that moment comes, stay connected to truth. Verse 5. And that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken to turn you away from the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you out of the house of bondage, to thrust thee out of the way, which the Lord thy God commanded thee to walk in. So shalt thou put the evil away from the midst of thee. Now we arrive at one of the verses that causes many people to stop reading. At first glance, it sounds severe. That prophet shall be put to death. But before jumping to conclusions, let's stay consistent with the symbolic framework we've been using. The question becomes, what is actually being put to death? Remember, the prophet here is not merely a person. Throughout this chapter, the prophet symbolizes ideas, beliefs, narratives, thought systems, inner voices, and mental frameworks. It is anything attempting to guide consciousness. Put to death. Throughout scripture, death often symbolizes an ending, the cessation of a pattern, The removal of something no longer serving life. The dissolution of a state of consciousness. Paul says, put to death the deeds of the flesh. He isn't talking about physically killing parts of your body. He is talking about ending destructive patterns, ending misaligned ways of being. Suppose you carry a belief, I am worthless. That belief repeatedly produces fear, self-sabotage, and insecurity. Awakening doesn't negotiate with that belief forever. Eventually, the belief must die, not the person, the belief. Turn you away. Notice the issue. The sign worked. The dream seemed convincing. The prophet sounded persuasive. The problem is not effectiveness. The problem is direction. Where is consciousness being led? Career example. Someone adopts the belief, my worth comes entirely from my job. That belief may even produce success. Promotions arrive. Money arrives. Recognition arrives. But eventually, consciousness becomes enslaved to performance. The belief has turned awareness away from truth. Relationship example. Someone believes, I need another person's approval to have value. The relationship becomes the throne. Identity becomes dependent on acceptance. The belief gradually pulls consciousness away from its own worth. Next, who brought you out of Egypt? Egypt appears again. Egypt represents unconsciousness, bondage, fear, limitation, and false identity. The Lord is the principle that liberates consciousness. The prophet is the voice, attempting to return consciousness to bondage. Relatable example. Think about someone who has overcome toxic relationships, addiction, fear, and low self-esteem. Then an old voice returns. You will never change. You are still that old person. Go back. The prophet is trying to lead them back to Egypt. The house of bondage. Anything that enslaves consciousness becomes Egypt. Examples: fear, shame, ego, greed, approval seeking, bitterness, and self-hatred. The question becomes, what is trying to pull consciousness back into bondage? Social media example. Many people begin content creation wanting to help others. Then they become trapped by views, algorithms, engagement, and comparison. The very thing that once felt free becomes a prison. A new Egypt appears. to thrust thee out of the way. Notice how subtle this is. The prophet doesn't necessarily destroy the path immediately. The prophet nudges, redirects, distracts, gradually moves consciousness off course. Spiritual example. A person begins seeking truth, then gradually becomes obsessed with proving others wrong, winning debates, defending identity. The original path was truth. The new path is ego. The shift may happen slowly. Put the evil away from the midst of thee. The evil is not primarily an external enemy. It is the pattern pulling consciousness away from life, away from truth, away from freedom, away from awakening. Imagine a thought arising, I am not enough. If you keep serving that thought, it becomes a prophet. It directs your decisions, shapes your relationships, influences your future. At some point, awakening says, this voice cannot remain on the throne. The prophet must die. The false belief must end. Christ consciousness and the death of illusion. Throughout the New Testament, the thing that repeatedly dies is not the person. It is the old man, false identity, illusion, separation, and bondage. The Christ principle continually puts to death whatever keeps consciousness trapped in Egypt. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, end the patterns, beliefs, and voices that continually pull consciousness away from truth and back into bondage. Do not kill the person, kill the illusion. Do not destroy the human being, destroy the false belief. Do not attack the soul. Remove what enslaves the soul. Because awakening is not about destroying people. It is about ending the patterns that keep consciousness imprisoned. And that is why Moses says, put the evil away from the midst of thee. Not because God desires destruction, but because freedom cannot flourish while bondage remains on the throne. Verse 6. If thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or the wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, who is as thy own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers. Now the teaching becomes much deeper. Up until now, the false prophet was somewhat distant, an idea, a teacher, a voice, a dream, something outside the circle. Now Moses moves the challenge much closer. The invitation away from truth comes from your brother, your child, your spouse, your closest friend. In other words, the voices we are most likely to trust. Why this is so powerful? Most people think deception comes from enemies. Moses says, not always. Sometimes the strongest pull away from truth comes from what is most familiar, most loved, most trusted, most emotionally connected. The deeper pattern. Notice what Moses is exposing. Truth is not tested when strangers disagree with you. Truth is tested when someone you love asks you to abandon what you know to be true. Relationship example. A person enters a relationship. They know their worth, their boundaries, their values. Over time, the partner says, if you love me, you ignore that boundary. If you love me, you compromise your values. If you love me, you become someone you are not. The temptation is not coming from an enemy. It is coming from someone emotionally close. Next is brother. Symbolically, a brother often represents a familiar thought, a familiar pattern, something closely related to your current identity. Sometimes, the beliefs that pull us away from truth are not foreign. They are familiar, comfortable, and inherited. Everyday life example. You decide to improve your life. Then a familiar voice appears. Don't take it so seriously. Relax. You've always been this way. The voice sounds familiar because it comes from an old version of yourself, a brother. Next, son or daughter. Sons and daughters symbolize manifestations, expressions of consciousness, what emerges from us. Sometimes our own creations become idols. Career example. Someone builds a successful business. The business becomes the son. The creation becomes the child. Eventually, the business begins demanding all their time, all their energy, all their attention. The creation starts pulling them away from what matters most. The son becomes the voice, the manifestation. The business becomes the voice. Next, wife of thy bosom. The wife represents what consciousness is joined to, what it loves, what it is intimately connected with. Relationship example. Someone becomes deeply attached to a relationship. Gradually, they begin sacrificing truth, authenticity, and integrity to preserve the relationship. The relationship itself becomes a god. Not because love is wrong, because the throne has shifted. Next, friend as thy own soul. This is perhaps the strongest image in the verse. A friend who feels like your own soul. Someone whose opinion matters deeply. Someone you trust. Someone you love. Someone whose approval feels important. Social media example. This happens constantly. A person enters a community. The group becomes family. The tribe becomes identity. Eventually, the group begins promoting ideas that conflict with truth. The temptation becomes follow truth and lose the group, or keep the group and abandon truth. That is the test Moses is describing. Entice this secretly. Notice this carefully. The invitation is subtle, not forceful, not obvious, gradual, quiet, persuasive. Most departures from truth happen this way. One compromise, then another, then another. The path shifts slowly. Relatable example. No one wakes up one day and says, I want to abandon my integrity. Instead, it sounds like just this once. Nobody will know. It's not a big deal. The invitation comes secretly. Next, let us serve other gods. Again, the issue is not statues. The issue is what takes the throne. What becomes the governing principle? What receives devotion? The invitation may sound like serve approval, serve money, serve status, serve fear, serve ego, serve comfort. Anything that replaces truth becomes an other god. Christ consciousness and inner loyalty. This verse is ultimately about loyalty, not loyalty to people, not loyalty to groups, not loyalty to identities, loyalty to truth. The Christ principle remains aligned with truth, even when emotional pressure suggests another path. Remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They said, we will not bow. We won't bow. If you like, throw us into the fire. Loyalty. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, even the people, attachments, identities, and familiar patterns you love most must not be allowed to replace truth on the throne. Because not every voice that feels close is wise. Not every familiar voice leads to freedom. Not every beloved voice leads to awakening. And one of the greatest tests of consciousness is this: can you remain faithful to truth, even when the invitation to abandon it comes from something you deeply love? That is the challenge Moses is introducing here. Verse 7. Namely, of the gods of the people who are round about you, nigh unto thee, or far off from thee, from the one end of the earth, even unto the other end of the earth. This verse expands the warning. In the previous verse, the temptation came from people close to you: brother, son, daughter, spouse, or friend. Now Moses widens the lens. The pull away from truth is not limited to your inner circle. It can come from anywhere. Next, the gods of the people round about you. This is extremely relevant. Notice, the gods are not hidden. They are all around you, surrounding you, embedded in culture, embedded in society, embedded in everyday life. Most people think idolatry is bowing before a statue. But Moses is describing something much more subtle. The gods are the things society collectively serves, the things society collectively worships, the things society collectively organizes itself around. Examples today: depending on the environment, the cultural gods may be money, status, beauty, popularity, power, political identity, social approval, and religious superiority. The entire culture may be serving them without even realizing it. Round about you. This phrase is profound. The challenge is not merely personal, it is environmental. We are all influenced by the atmosphere around us, the conversations around us, the media around us, the expectations around us, the values around us. Career example: a workplace culture may sadly teach your value equals your productivity. Nobody says it directly, yet everything reinforces it. Promotions, recognition, status. Eventually, people begin serving productivity as their god. A healthy person eventually realizes work matters, but my humanity is not defined by work. The awakened soul puts productivity in its proper place. Next, nigh unto thee. The gods closest to us are often the hardest to recognize. Why? Because they feel normal, they feel familiar, they feel obvious. Many people grow up believing, what will people think, is one of the most important questions in life. Eventually, approval becomes a god, not because anyone intentionally worships approval, because it silently governs decisions. Next, or far off from thee. This is fascinating. Some influences come from distant places, different cultures, different philosophies, different systems, different ideologies. The source doesn't matter. The principle remains the same. Social media example. Through social media, ideas from one side of the world can influence consciousness on the other side of the world instantly. People are exposed to influences, movements, ideologies, and philosophies from every corner of the earth. The voices are no longer merely local. Next, from one end of the earth to the other. Moses is essentially saying, it doesn't matter where the idea comes from, near, far, popular, unpopular, traditional, or modern, the test remains the same. The real question, not is this popular, not is everyone doing it, not that society approve, but is it true? Does it lead toward freedom? Does it align with reality? Spiritual example. Many people assume if a belief is widely accepted, it must be true. History repeatedly proves otherwise. Large groups can be wrong. Small groups can be wrong. The size of the crowd is not the measure of truth. Christ consciousness and discernment. Christ consciousness does not follow something because it is ancient, modern, popular, traditional, or trending. It examines fruit, reality, alignment, and truth. This verse can also be read inwardly. The people round about you can symbolize all the influences surrounding consciousness, such as fears, desires, memories, habits, cultural conditioning. Not every influence deserves the throne. Not every voice deserves obedience. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, do not allow the values, pressures, and priorities of the surrounding culture to replace truth as the governing principle of consciousness. Because ideas come from everywhere, voices come from everywhere, influences come from everywhere, near and far, ancient and modern, popular and obscure. The question is never where did it come from? The question is, what is it leading me to serve? And that is discernment Moses is cultivating. Verse 8. Thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him. Neither shall thine eye pity him, neither shalt thou spare, neither shalt thou conceal him. This is one of the most misunderstood verses in the chapter. At first glance, it sounds harsh, almost cruel. But when read through the lens of awakening, truth, and accountability, the verse becomes incredibly relevant to real life. Because Moses is not teaching hatred. He is teaching something many people struggle with. He is saying, do not allow misplaced loyalty, misplaced compassion, or fear of consequences to protect what is causing harm. Thou shalt not consent unto him. The first step is consent, agreement, participation, cooperation. Many destructive systems survive because good people quietly consent to them, not because they support the harm, but because they are afraid of confronting it. Family example. A child tells someone, this person is hurting me. The adult knows something is wrong. But instead of acting, they say, let's keep this within the family. At that moment, consent begins. The abuse may have been committed by one person, but the silence begins involving others. Nor hearken unto him. Do not listen to the voice that says, protect the family name. Think about the reputation. Don't embarrass us. Don't tell anyone. Because once truth is sacrificed for appearance, the city begins drifting away from reality. Many adults today still carry wounds from childhood because somebody listened to the wrong voice, not the voice of truth, not the voice of protection, but the voice saying, keep it quiet. Next, neither shall thine eye pity him. This is where the verse becomes incredibly important. Moses is not condemning compassion. He is exposing misplaced compassion. Family example. People often say, but he's your father. But he's your uncle. But his family. Think about what will happen to him. And suddenly, all the compassion flows toward the offender. No, meanwhile, nobody asks, what happened to the child? What happened to the victim? Who is protecting the vulnerable? The difference between compassion and enabling. Compassion seeks healing. Enabling protects the destructive pattern. Those are not the same thing. Neither shalt thou spare. Again, this is not about cruelty. It is about refusing to protect what is causing harm. Church example. Imagine someone reports abuse in a religious setting. Instead of addressing it, leaders say, "He's a man of God. Let's not damage the ministry. Think about the people who depend on him. Let's handle this quietly." The concern shifts away from truth and toward protecting the institution. The institution becomes the God. The ministry becomes the idol. Truth becomes secondary. Next, neither shalt thou conceal him. Do not conceal it. Do not hide it. Do not bury it. Do not sweep it under the rug. Family example. How many children have grown into adults carrying decades of pain because everyone knew, but nobody spoke? A mother knew. An aunt knew. A cousin knew. A grandparent suspected. Yet everyone said, "Let's keep this among ourselves." The child carried the trauma. The offender remained protected and often continued harming others. Religious example. How many scandals have emerged years later because people knew? Elders knew. Pastors knew. Staff knew. Family members knew. Yet everyone chose silence. The problem wasn't merely the original offense. The problem was the concealment. Why this mirrors the rest of the chapter? The entire chapter is about false prophets, voices that pull consciousness away from truth. Sometimes the false prophet sounds like, "Protect the reputation. Don't expose it. Think about what people will say. Let's keep it quiet." The false prophet is not always the abuser. Sometimes the false prophet is the voice protecting the abuse. Christ consciousness and truth. The Christ principle consistently brings hidden things into the light, not to shame, to heal, not to destroy people, to stop the cycle of harm. Because healing cannot begin where truth is forbidden. Imagine a child finally finding the courage to speak. The entire future may depend on whether the adults respond with, "Let's keep this quiet," or, "Thank you for telling me. I believe you. We are going to protect you." One response protects the city of deception. The other protects truth. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, Do not protect, excuse, hide, or enable patterns that are causing harm simply because confronting them is uncomfortable. Because truth is not the enemy. Exposure is not the enemy. Accountability is not the enemy. The real enemy is the silence that allows suffering to continue. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is bring what has been hidden into the light. Not because you hate the person, but because you love truth, healing, justice, and the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. Verse 9. But thou shalt surely kill him. Thy hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterwards the hand of all the people. This is one of those verses that immediately makes modern readers uncomfortable, because on the surface it sounds violent. But if we've been following the symbolic pattern of the chapter, Moses is not teaching people to kill one another. He is teaching something much deeper. There are some patterns that cannot be negotiated with. They must end. Not the person, the pattern. Not the human being, their deception. Not the soul, the system that is producing harm. Thou shalt surely kill him. Throughout this chapter, the false prophet has represented destructive beliefs, harmful influences, deceptive narratives, and patterns that pull consciousness away from truth. To kill the prophet symbolically means remove its authority and its influence. Stop giving it power. Refuse to let it govern the city any longer. Family example. Suppose a child reports abuse. The family knows. The adults know. The relatives know. For years, everyone says, keep quiet. Think about the family. Don't disgrace us. Let's handle this privately. That silence becomes the false prophet. That culture of concealment becomes the false prophet. And Moses is saying that pattern must die. Not the people, the silence. Not the family, the concealment. Not the child, the system protecting the harm. Thy hand shall be first. This is incredibly powerful. Hands represents actions. So he's saying the person who sees the truth must act. The person who knows something is wrong must participate in ending the pattern. Many people say someone should do something, But Moses says, your hand first. In other words, if you see the deception, don't wait for everyone else. If you see the problem, don't assume someone else will address it. If you know a child is being harmed, your responsibility begins the moment awareness arrives. Another example, a mother discovers her boyfriend or spouse is harming her child. A father discovers abuse is taking place. A grandparent becomes aware. An aunt becomes aware. The question becomes, will truth act or will fear remain silent? The first hand belongs to the person who knows. Next, afterwards, the hand of all the people. This is where systems begin to heal. Once someone has the courage to speak, others often find the courage to speak as well. How many scandals have eventually come to light because one person finally refused to remain silent? One victim speaks, then another, then another, then another. Suddenly, everyone realizes I wasn't the only one. The whole city begins waking up. This is painfully relevant. For years, there have been situations where church leaders knew, elders knew, staff knew, members suspected, yet everyone remained silent. Then one person speaks, and the entire system begins to unravel. Not because truth is destroying the church, because truth is exposing what was destroying the church. The difference between destroying a person and destroying a pattern. This distinction is absolutely crucial. Many people confuse accountability with hatred. They are not the same thing. Reporting abuse is not hatred. Exposing corruption is not hatred. Protecting a child is not hatred. Telling the truth is not hatred. The goal is restoration. The goal is not revenge. The goal is not humiliation. The goal is not distraction. The goal is ending the pattern that keeps producing victims. Think about workplace harassment. Think about domestic violence. Think about abuse in schools. Think about abuse in religious organizations. Often, the greatest damage is not only the original act. The greatest damage is the system of silence surrounding it. The culture of don't say anything. Protect the organization. Protect the reputation. Protect the family. That culture becomes the false prophet. And Moses is saying that system must lose its power. Christ consciousness and courage. The Christ principle consistently stands with truth, even when truth is uncomfortable, even when truth strengthens powerful systems, even when truth exposes what people would rather hide. Because healing cannot begin while deception remains protected. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, be the first to withdraw your support from systems of deception, silence, and concealment that allow harm to continue. Be the first to tell the truth. Be the first to protect the vulnerable. Be the first to refuse the lie. Be the first to challenge the culture of silence. And when truth finally finds a voice, others often find theirs too. Because sometimes the most courageous act is not destroying a person. Sometimes the most courageous act is ending the pattern that has been hurting people for generations. Verse 10. And thou shalt stone him with stones that he die, because he has sought to thrust thee away from the Lord thy God, who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. When most people read this verse, they focus on the stones. But if we've been following the symbolic flow of the chapter, the real question is, what is being stoned? Not a human being, not a child, not a family member, not a friend. The thing being confronted is the pattern that keeps pulling consciousness away from truth and back into bondage. The stones. Throughout scripture, stones often symbolize truth, evidence, testimony, examination, or reality. A stone has weight, substance. It is not a rumor. It is not an assumption. It is something solid, something that can withstand scrutiny. This connects perfectly with verse 14, which we will soon get. Notice, Moses already said, inquire, search, ask diligently, verify. In other words, before any stone is thrown, the facts must be established. The evidence must be examined. The truth must be known. Let's revisit the example of abuse within a family. A child speaks up. At first, people say, don't talk about it. Keep it within the family. Think about the reputation. The false prophet is already speaking. The false prophet is the voice protecting the deception. Now the stones arrive. Not literal stones, but truth, evidence, investigation, witnesses, facts, the reality that can no longer be ignored. The pattern begins to die because the truth is finally being allowed to speak. The silence is being challenged. The concealment is being exposed. The city of deception starts collapsing. Religious example. A church leader abuses their position. People know. People suspect. But the institution says, let's not bring shame to the church. He's a man of God. Let's handle it privately. For years, the false prophet survives because nobody is willing to confront it with stones. Then someone brings evidence, documentation, witnesses, testimony. Truth enters the room. The stones begin to fly. Not at a person, at the deception, at the concealment, at the system that protected the harm. Why stones? Because deception survives in darkness. Truth brings things into the light. And once truth is exposed, many illusions cannot survive. Next, because he has sought to thrust thee away. Notice again, the issue is not disagreement. The issue is direction. What is this pattern pulling you toward? Truth or bondage? Freedom or concealment? Healing or silence? Family example. The abuse itself causes harm. But so does the voice saying, don't tell anyone. That voice is trying to thrust consciousness away from truth, away from justice, away from healing, away from protection. Church example. The misconduct causes harm. But so does the voice saying, protect the ministry. When protecting reputation becomes more important than protecting people, consciousness is already being pulled away from truth. Egypt appears again. Notice Moses keeps returning to Egypt because Egypt is the real issue. Egypt represents bondage, fear, oppression, unconsciousness, and systems that keep people trapped. When a victim is forced into silence, they often carry shame, fear, confusion, and self-blame for years. That is Egypt. That is bondage. And every voice saying, stay silent, is trying to keep them there. The house of bondage. This chapter is ultimately about freedom. Freedom from lies. Freedom from fear. Freedom from systems that protect harm. Freedom from anything that keeps consciousness imprisoned. Christ consciousness and truth. The Christ principle consistently brings hidden things into the light. Not to destroy people, to stop cycles of harm, to protect the vulnerable, to create healing, to restore truth. How many people are still carrying wounds because the adults around them chose silence. How many victims suffered because truth was sacrificed for reputation? How many systems remained broken because everyone was protecting the city instead of protecting the people? That is exactly why Moses says the false prophet must be stoned. Because once truth, evidence, testimony, and reality begin speaking, the deception can no longer survive. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, allow truth, evidence, testimony, and reality to completely dismantle every system of deception, concealment, and silence that keeps people trapped in bondage. Because truth is not the enemy. Exposure is not the enemy. Accountability is not the enemy. The real enemy is the lie that says, protect the system while people continue to suffer. And sometimes, the stones that save lives are not stones of condemnation. They are the stones of truth. Verse 11, and all Israel shall hear and fear, and shall do no more any such wickedness as this is among you. This verse is often read as people will be afraid of punishment. But within the symbolic framework we've been using, it points to something much deeper. The goal is not fear. The goal is awareness. The goal is that truth becomes visible enough that the entire community learns from it. All Israel shall hear. Israel often represents awakened consciousness, the part of us seeking truth, the part of us moving out of Egypt and toward freedom. Notice that Moses does not say one person will hear. He says, all Israel shall hear. In other words, the lesson spreads throughout the entire community. The truth becomes known. The silence is broken. The deception is exposed. Family example. For years, a family may protect an abuser. Everyone knows. Nobody speaks. The culture becomes keep it quiet. Don't tell anyone. Think about the family name. Then finally, the truth comes out. The silence breaks. And suddenly, everyone sees the damage that concealment caused. Israel hears. The entire family is confronted with reality. Why this matters? Many harmful patterns survive because they remain hidden. The moment truth becomes visible, people begin learning. The community begins learning. The next generation begins learning. The cycle begins breaking. Many adults today are finally speaking publicly about abuse they experienced as children. For years, they suffered alone. Then they found the courage to tell their story. And suddenly, Thousands of others realized, I'm not alone. That happened to me too. What happened wasn't normal. Israel hears. Awareness spreads. The silence loses power. Next, and fear. Again, this is not terror. This is awareness, sobriety, understanding consequences, a deep recognition of what happens when truth is ignored. Family example. A family sees what years of concealment did to a child. Now they understand. Not because they are terrified, because they finally see the consequences. Wisdom enters, awareness enters. Religious example. A church covers up misconduct for years. Eventually, the truth comes out. Victims come forward. The damage becomes visible. Now the community understands. Protecting the institution caused more harm than exposing the truth would have. The lesson becomes real. Israel hears. And shall do no more. This is the goal. Transformation, not punishment, not revenge, change. The purpose of exposure is not humiliation. The purpose is preventing the cycle from continuing. A family that once protected abuse may eventually become the very family that says, we don't hide these things anymore. We believe victims. We protect children. The city changes. The culture changes. The lesson becomes wisdom. Church example. A church that once concealed misconduct may eventually create accountability systems, reporting processes, safeguards for children, and transparency. The goal is not distraction. The goal is that the same wickedness does not continue. Notice something important. The wickedness is not only the original act. The wickedness also includes the culture that protects the act, the silence, the concealment, the refusal to confront truth. This is why verse 8 was so powerful. It says, neither shalt thou conceal him, because concealment often allows the harm to continue for years, sometimes generations. Christ consciousness and breaking cycles. The Christ principle consistently interrupts destructive cycles, not merely exposing them, transforming them. The purpose of truth is not shame. The purpose of truth is freedom. How many children could be protected if adults stop prioritizing reputation over truth? How many lives could be different if communities chose transparency over concealment? How many wounds could heal if people stopped asking, how do we protect the institution, and started asking, how do we protect the vulnerable? That is the lesson Israel is meant to hear. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, when truth is brought into the light, The entire community gains wisdom. Harmful cycles are exposed, and consciousness becomes less willing to repeat the same patterns. The goal is not fear. The goal is awakening. The goal is that future generations no longer suffer because of yesterday's silence. The goal is that Israel hears, Israel understands, and Israel chooses truth over concealment, healing over reputation, and freedom over bondage. Verse 12. If thou shalt hear say in one of thy cities, which the Lord thy God had given thee to dwell there, saying. This verse may seem like a simple transition, but it contains one of the most important principles in the entire chapter. Notice how it begins. If thou shalt hear say. Not if it is true. Not if it actually happened. Not if the accusation is proven, but if you hear a report. That distinction matters, because Moses is teaching us how to respond when allegations, accusations, concerns, or troubling reports come to our attention. If thou shalt hear say. In other words, someone says something happened. A report emerges. An allegation surfaces. A concern is raised. A warning is given. What happens next will determine the health of the entire city. Family example. A child tells an adult, someone is hurting me. At that moment, the adult has not yet investigated. The facts may not yet be fully known, but a report has been made. A voice has spoken. A concern has been raised. What happens next matters enormously. Religious example. Someone comes forward and says, a leader abused their authority. A pastor acted inappropriately. A child was harmed. Again, a report has been made. The question becomes, what does the city do with the report? There are two dangerous extremes. One extreme says, believe nothing, dismiss everything, ignore it, protect the system, protect the reputation, silence the person. The other extreme says, assume guilt immediately, skip investigation, skip evidence, skip discernment, destroy people first and ask questions later. Moses chooses neither extreme, and that is incredibly important. The wisdom of Moses. Moses does not say, ignore the report, nor does he say, react immediately. He simply says, you heard something. Now pay attention. Now investigate. Now seek truth. Family example. A child reports abuse. A healthy response is neither you are lying, nor let's destroy someone without investigation. A healthy response is, I hear you. I take this seriously. We are going to find out the truth. That is wisdom. That is discernment. That is protection. One of thy cities. The city represents more than a physical location. It represents a system, a culture, a community, a state of consciousness, a structure people live within. Family as a city. A family is a city. It has values, rules, loyalties, culture, and patterns. When abuse is reported within the family, the city is being tested. Will truth matter, or will reputation matter more? Church as a city. A church is a city. An organization is a city. A community is a city. Every system eventually faces moments where truth challenges comfort. The real test. The test is not whether allegations arise. Allegations arise everywhere. The test is how the city responds when they do. A painful reality. Many victims are harmed twice. First by the abuse, then by the community's response. The first wound comes from the offender. The second wound comes from the city. When a child speaks and hears, don't tell anyone. You ruin the family. You damage the church. The city is revealing what God sits on its throne. Reputation versus truth. This is one of the deepest themes in the chapter. Many cities claim to serve truth, but when truth threatens reputation, we discover what they actually serve. Family example. The family says, we don't want people talking. Reputation becomes the God. Religious example. The church says, we can't let this become public. The institution becomes the God. Workplace example. The organization says, this will hurt our image. The brand becomes the God. Truth is sacrificed to protect something else. Christ consciousness and listening. One of the most beautiful things about Jesus is that he listened. People brought reports. People brought accusations. People brought concerns. And rather than reacting impulsively, he consistently moved toward deeper truth, deeper understanding, deeper awareness. Imagine how many lives would be different if communities follow this principle. When someone says something is wrong, instead of be quiet, the response becomes, let's find out the truth. Not denial, not panic, not concealment, not mob justice, but truth. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, when concerns, allegations, warnings, or troubling reports arise within a family, community, institution, or system, neither ignore them nor react blindly. Take them seriously enough to seek the truth. Because healing begins when people are willing to listen. Justice begins when people are willing to listen. Protection begins when people are willing to listen. And many cities fall not because nobody spoke, but because nobody listened. Verse 13. Certain men, the children of Belial, are gone out from among you, and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their cities, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which ye have not known. Now the report begins to reveal the problem. And notice something very important. The city did not become corrupted all at once. A few voices emerged. A few influences appeared. A few people began normalizing something that should never have been normalized. And eventually, the entire city was affected. Certain men. Notice Moses doesn't say everyone. He says certain men, a small group, a few voices, a few influences, a few patterns. This is how corruption often begins. Not with an entire system becoming unhealthy overnight, but with a few voices that gradually shifts the culture. Family example. Imagine a family where abuse is taking place. Perhaps it is a parent, a relative, a mother's boyfriend or spouse, a trusted family friend. At first, only a few people know. Then someone says, let's keep this within the family. Another says, don't tell anyone. Another says, think about what people will say. A few voices begin shaping the entire culture. The problem is no longer just the abuse. The problem becomes the system protecting the abuse. The city begins to drift away from truth. Children of Belial. Symbolically, these are influences that produce confusion, disorder, corruption, and separation from truth. Notice that the abuse itself is destructive, but so is the voice saying, stay silent, protect the reputation, don't expose it, because those voices help keep the darkness alive. Religious example. A child reports abuse. A vulnerable person reports misconduct. A leader reports inappropriate behavior. Instead of confronting the truth, people say, he's a man of God. Let's not bring shame to the church. Let's handle this internally. Don't touch God's anointed. The false prophet is no longer just the offender. The false prophet becomes the culture that protects the offender. Gone out from among you. Notice the influence comes from within, not outside, within. The corruption develops inside the city itself. This mirrors real life. Many scandals are not created by outsiders. The damage often grows because insiders remain silent. People know. People suspect. People see, yet nobody speaks. The city becomes sick from within. Next, withdrawn the inhabitants. This word is incredibly important. The inhabitants are drawn away, pulled away, redirected, not by force, by persuasion, by normalization. Family example. A child instinctively knows something is wrong. Yet the family says, don't talk about it. Respect your elders. Don't destroy the family. Gradually, truth gets replaced by loyalty to the system. The inhabitants are withdrawn. The city moves away from truth. Church example. People know misconduct is happening, but they convince themselves the ministry is doing good work. Many people are being helped. Let's not damage the church. Soon, protecting the institution becomes more important than protecting the vulnerable. The city is being withdrawn. Let us go and serve other gods. Now we reach the heart of the issue. What are the gods here? Not statues, not idols made of stone. The gods are whatever takes the throne above truth. In the family example, the god becomes reputation. The family serves reputation. Truth gets sacrificed. The child gets sacrificed. Healing gets sacrificed because reputation has become the god. In the church example, the god becomes the institution. Protecting the ministry becomes more important than protecting people. The organization becomes the god. Truth is pushed aside. Everyday life example. The god may be comfort, approval, status, power, or fear of embarrassment. Anything that becomes more important than truth occupies the throne. The real tragedy. Notice that the city is not destroyed by the original offense alone. The city is destroyed because an entire culture develops around protecting the offense. The corruption becomes systemic. The deception becomes collective. The silence becomes normalized. Christ consciousness and bringing things into the light. This is why Jesus constantly brought hidden things into the light. Not to shame people, to heal people. Not to destroy people, to free people. Truth is uncomfortable when first revealed, but concealment allows suffering to continue. How many lives have been damaged because someone said, let's keep this quiet? How many children carried wounds into adulthood because the adults around them protected the reputation of the offender? How many victims stayed silent because the city had already chosen its God? This is exactly why Moses later says, neither shalt thou conceal him, because concealment protects the pattern. Truth protects the vulnerable. The deeper meaning, the verse is saying, be aware of the voices and influences that slowly convince an entire system to value reputation, power, comfort, or loyalty above truth. Because cities rarely collapse because of one act. They collapse when truth is sacrificed to protect the system. And whenever a culture begins saying, keep it quiet, protect the reputation, don't expose it, a false prophet is already speaking. And consciousness must decide whether it will serve truth or the God that is demanding silence. Verse 14, then shalt thou inquire and make search and ask diligently, and behold, if it be truth, and the thing certain, that such abomination is wrought among you. This may be one of the most important verses in the entire chapter. Why? Because after hearing a report, Moses does not say, react immediately. He does not say, ignore it. He does not say, protect the family. He does not say, protect the church. He does not say, protect the reputation. Instead, Moses says, inquire, make search, ask diligently. In other words, find out what is true. This is the opposite of blind loyalty. Many people assume loyalty means protecting people no matter what. Moses says loyalty to truth comes first. Because without truth, there can be no healing. Without truth, there can be no justice. Without truth, there can be no restoration. Next, then shalt thou inquire. Notice how seriously Moses takes the report. He doesn't dismiss it. He investigates it. Family example. A child says, someone is hurting me. Moses does not say, ignore the child. Nor does he say, destroy the accused immediately. He says, inquire, ask questions, listen carefully, take the report seriously. This is where many families fail. The child speaks. The adults become uncomfortable. And instead of investigating, they begin protecting the family image. Next, make search. This goes deeper. Search means examine evidence, investigate facts, seek understanding, look beneath appearances. Many victims spend years carrying trauma because nobody searched. Nobody wanted to know. Nobody wanted the answer because sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. Religious example. Someone reports misconduct by a leader. Instead of searching, people say, not him. He's a man of God. I know him. He would never do that. The investigation ends before it begins. The city chooses reputation over truth. Next, ask diligently. Not casually, not superficially, not selectively, diligently, carefully, thoroughly, honestly. Church example. Imagine a child comes forward and reports abuse. A diligent inquiry asks, what happened? When did it happen? Who else knows? Are there witnesses? Are there other victims? What evidence exists? The goal is not protecting an institution. The goal is finding truth. Family example. Imagine an adult finally speaks about abuse that happened years earlier. A diligent inquiry does not say, that was long ago. A diligent inquiry asks, what happened? How can we understand this? How can we prevent this from happening again? Next line, if it be truth. This is the key, truth. Not assumptions, not rumors, not fear, not loyalty, not reputation, truth. Why this matters? Many communities make one of two mistakes. Some immediately dismiss allegations. Others immediately assume guilt. Moses chooses neither. He chooses investigation. That is wisdom. That is discernment. That is justice. Next line, and the thing certain. Notice how high the standard is. Not it might be true. Not it sounds true. Not people are talking, but the thing is certain. In other words, the truth has been established. The facts have been examined. The evidence has been weighed. The matter has been investigated. Christ consciousness and truth. The Christ principle never fears investigation. Truth does not fear examination. Only deception fears examination. Only falsehood fears questions. Only corruption fears the light. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, when serious concerns arise, neither conceal them nor react blindly. Have the courage to seek the truth thoroughly, honestly, and without favoritism, because truth is not the enemy. Questions are not the enemy. Investigation is not the enemy. The real danger is a city that values reputation so much that it stops searching for the truth. And Moses is teaching something profoundly relevant today. When someone says something is wrong, don't protect the city first. Find out if it's true. Verse 15. Thou shalt surely smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, destroying it utterly, and all that is therein, and the cattle thereof with the edge of the sword. Now we arrive at one of the strongest verses in the chapter. And because of the language, many people assume Moses is teaching violence. But let's stay consistent with the flow of the chapter. Notice what came before this verse. A report was made. Moses said, inquire. Moses said, investigate. Moses says, search diligently. Moses said, establish the truth. Only after the facts are known does action follow. So the question is not who do we destroy? The question is what system is being dismantled? The city revisited. Throughout this chapter, the city represents more than a physical location. The city represents a culture, a system, a structure, a way of operating, a collective state of consciousness. The city is the environment that has become corrupted. Family example. Imagine a family where abuse has been hidden for years. Everyone knows. Nobody speaks. Victims are silenced. Truth is suppressed. Reputation is protected. The problem is no longer one person's actions. The problem has become the culture itself. The city is corrupted. The city now operates according to a different God. Protect the family at all costs. Even if a child suffers, even if truth suffers, even if justice suffers. Next is the sword. What destroys the city? The sword. And throughout scripture, the sword often symbolizes truth, discernment, revelation, or exposure. The sword separates truth from deception. The sword exposes what has been hidden. The sword cuts through illusion. Family example. What destroys the culture of silence? Truth. What destroys the culture of concealment? Truth. What destroys generations of secrecy? Truth. The sword is not violence. The sword is reality, finally being allowed to speak. Destroying it utterly. This is where many people become uncomfortable. But think about what Moses is actually saying. If a city is built around protecting abuse, can part of that culture remain? If a church is built around concealing misconduct, can the concealment remain? If a family is built around silencing victims, can the silence remain? The answer is no. The entire system must change. The entire culture must change. The entire city must be transformed. Religious example. Suppose a church discovers that abuse has been covered up for years. The solution is not keep the same system, keep the same secrecy, keep the same protection mechanisms. The city itself must change. Policies change. Leadership changes. Accountability changes. Transparency increases. The old city cannot remain. Next is the inhabitants. The inhabitants are the beliefs and behaviors sustaining the city. In a family culture of silence, the inhabitants may include fear, denial, intimidation, shame, secrecy, and reputation management. These are the residents of the city. And if healing is going to occur, they cannot continue ruling. A painful reality. Many victims are not only harmed by the original offense, they are harmed by the inhabitants of the city. Don't tell. Nobody will believe you. Think about the family. Think about the church. Those voices become part of the system. Next, and the cattle thereof. The cattle represent the resources feeding the city, the things sustaining the culture. Family example. What sustains the culture of silence? Sometimes financial dependence, family reputation, fear of embarrassment, social status. These become the cattle feeding the city. As long as they remain untouched, the city can rebuild itself. Church example. What sustains concealment? Sometimes donations, influence, public image, institutional power. Those become the cattle sustaining the corruption. Why this is so relevant today? Many institutions have discovered this lesson the hard way. You cannot expose misconduct while preserving the exact system that allowed it. If the system remains unchanged, the city simply rebuilds itself. Christ consciousness and transformation. The Christ principle does not merely expose problems, it transforms systems, it transforms cultures, it transforms ways of thinking. Truth does not stop at identifying the wound. Truth addresses the environment that allowed the wound to continue. If a child reports abuse and the adult finally believes them, but nothing changes, the city remains. If misconduct is exposed, but the culture of secrecy remains, the city remains. If truth comes out, but accountability never follows, the city remains. Moses is saying the city itself must change. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, when a system is found to be built upon deception, silence, concealment, and the protection of harm, allow truth to dismantle the entire culture that made the harm possible. Not just the act, the culture. Not just the symptom, the system. Not just the offender, the environment that protected the offense. Because true healing is not merely exposing the darkness. True healing is making sure the city that protected the darkness can no longer operate the same way again. Verse 16. And thou shalt gather all the spoil of it into the midst of the streets thereof, and shalt burn with fire the city, and all the spoil thereof every way, for the Lord thy God, and it shall be a heap forever. It shall not be built again. This verse becomes incredibly powerful when read in light of everything we've been discussing. Because after the truth has been established, After the investigation has taken place, after the culture of deception has been exposed, Moses now addresses something many people overlook. What do you do with the remnant of the old system? Gather all the spoil. The spoil represents what remains after the city has been exposed. The leftovers, the residue, the attitudes, the habits, the excuses, the structures that allowed the harm to continue. Family example. Suppose a family finally confronts years of abuse that was hidden. The truth comes out. The offender is exposed. But there is still spoil left behind. Years of silence, denial, guilt, shame, fear, unhealthy loyalties. The city has been exposed, but the residue remains. Religious example. A church uncovers misconduct that was concealed for years. The leader is removed. The facts come to light, yet the spoil remains. A culture of silence, blind loyalty, fear of questioning authority. Don't touch God's anointed. Protecting image over truth. The city has been exposed, but its residue still exists. Into the midst of the street. This is one of the most profound images in the chapter. Bring it into the open. Bring it into the center. Bring it where everyone can see it. Why this matters? Many families never heal because they acknowledge the event, but never address the culture that surrounded it. Many institutions never heal because they expose one offender, but never examine the system that protected the offender. The spoil remains hidden, and what remains hidden often survives. Healing begins when people are willing to honestly say, how did this happen? Why did we ignore the signs? Why didn't we listen? Why were people afraid to speak? That is bringing the spoil into the street. Next, burn with fire. Now we encounter another powerful symbol, fire. Throughout scripture, fire often represents purification, refinement, transformation, illumination. Fire removes what cannot remain. Fire reveals what is genuine. Family example. A family may finally confront uncomfortable truths. We cared more about appearances than protection. We ignored what was happening. We failed this child. Those truths can be painful. That pain is the fire, but it is also the beginning of healing. Church example. A religious community may realize we protected the ministry more than the people. That realization burns. It hurts. But that fire can purify the culture. For the Lord thy God. This is important. The purpose is not revenge. The purpose is not humiliation. The purpose is truth. It is healing. It is restoration. It is bringing the city back into alignment. Next, it shall be a heap forever. This does not mean living forever in shame. It means remembering the lesson. The city becomes a testimony, a reminder, a warning. Family example. Years later, a family may say, "What happened was terrible. We never want that to happen again." The lesson remains, the culture does not. Church example. A church may look back and say, "We learned from that failure. We created safeguards. We established accountability." The lesson remains, the system that enabled the harm does not. Next, it shall not be built again. This may be the most important phrase in the verse. Do not rebuild the culture that created the suffering. Family example. Do not rebuild silence, intimidation, secrecy, or reputation management. The old city must not return. Religious example. Do not rebuild blind loyalty, lack of accountability, fear of questioning leadership, protecting image above truth. The old city must remain a heap. Many institutions expose wrongdoing, but then slowly rebuild the exact same culture that allowed the wrongdoing in the first place. Different faces, same city, different names, same system. Moses says, don't rebuild it. Christ consciousness and transformation. The Christ principle does more than expose darkness. It transforms environments. It transforms cultures. It transforms consciousness. It asks, what allowed this to happen? What must change? What should never be rebuilt? The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, once truth has exposed a culture of deception, silence, concealment, or protection of harm, bring every part of that culture into the light. Allow it to be purified. Learn from it, and never return to the patterns that made the harm possible. Because healing is not only exposing the wound, healing is making sure the conditions that created the wound no longer exist. And that is why Moses says, it shall not be built again. Not because the goal is distraction, but because the goal is transformation. Verse 17. And there shall cleave not of the cursed thing to thy hand, that the Lord may turn from the fierceness of his anger, and show thee mercy, and have compassion upon thee, and multiply thee as he has sworn unto thy fathers. This verse is the natural conclusion of everything we've explored so far. The city has been investigated. The truth has been brought into the light. The culture of deception has been exposed. The system that enabled harm has been dismantled. Now Moses gives one final warning. Don't carry any part of the old system into the future. There shall cleave not. The word cleave means cling to, remain attached, stay connected. Moses is saying, do not let the old pattern stay attached to your hand. Do not carry pieces of the old city into the new one. Family example. A family finally confronts years of abuse and secrecy. The truth comes out. Healing begins. But now, another decision must be made. Will the family also let go of the silence, the intimidation, the fear of speaking up, and the obsession with reputation? Because if those things remain attached, the city can eventually rebuild itself. Religious example. A church uncovers misconduct and removes the leader. That's a start. But what if they keep blind loyalty, fear of questioning authority, protecting image above truth, and discouraging accountability? Then the cursed thing is still attached to the hand. The city may have fallen, but its spirit remains alive. The cursed thing. Within the symbolic framework we've been using, the curse is not God angrily placing misfortune on people. The curse is the suffering built into the pattern itself. Suppose a family culture says, we don't talk about problems. That culture produces secrecy, isolation, unhealed wounds, and generational trauma. The suffering is built into the system. The curse is the pattern. Church example. Suppose an institution values reputation more than truth. Eventually, it produces cover-ups, mistrust, wounded people, and repeated scandals. The suffering is built into the pattern. The curse is the culture itself. Why nothing can remain attached? Because whatever remains attached often becomes the seed of the next problem. Family example. Imagine a family says, we exposed the abuse, but still teaches children never question adults, never challenge authority, never speak about family problems. The same conditions remain. The city is already rebuilding. Religious example. A ministry experiences a scandal. Changes are made, but people continue saying, don't ask questions. Just trust leadership. Don't bring concerns forward. The city may have changed names, but the foundation remains the same. That the Lord may turn from his anger. This is often misunderstood. Within the symbolic reading, God's anger is not divine rage. It is the natural consequence of living out of alignment with truth. If a community continually ignores abuse, suffering grows. Trust breaks down. Relationships fracture. People live wounded. The consequences are built into the system. When the system changes, the consequences begin to change. Healing becomes possible. The anger turns away because the pattern creating the suffering has been removed. And show thee mercy. Notice what follows. Not punishment, not distraction, mercy, compassion, restoration. This reveals the true purpose of the chapter. The goal was never punishment. The goal was always healing. Family example. When a family finally chooses truth over reputation, healing becomes possible. Victims are heard. Children are protected. Trust can slowly be rebuilt. Mercy enters the city. Religious example. When a church chooses transparency over concealment, healing becomes possible. People feel safe. Victims are supported. The vulnerable are protected. Compassion becomes visible. Next, and multiply thee. This is beautiful. Healthy systems produce life. Healthy families produce life. Healthy communities produce life. Healthy churches produce life. When truth is honored, trust grows. Healing grows. Safety grows. Wisdom grows. Healthy relationships grow. Life multiplies. But when deception remains attached to the hand, fear multiplies. Secrecy multiplies. Wounds multiply. The city eventually returns to bondage. Christ consciousness and letting go. The Christ principle consistently invites transformation, not merely exposure. It's not enough to expose the darkness. We must release the patterns that created it. It's not enough to identify the problem. We must refuse to carry it forward. How many families continue suffering? Because they exposed one incident but never changed the culture. How many churches continue repeating the same mistakes? Because they removed one leader but never addressed the system. How many organizations change faces but not values? The cursed thing remains attached to the hand. The deeper meaning. The verse is saying, once truth has exposed a harmful culture, do not carry its values, habits, fears, loyalties, and patterns into the future. Do not carry the silence. Do not carry the intimidation. Do not carry the concealment. Do not carry the obsession with reputation. Do not carry the culture that allowed harm to flourish. Because healing does not begin merely when the truth is revealed. Healing begins when the old system is finally released, and only then can mercy, compassion, restoration, and life truly multiply. Verse 18. When thou shalt hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep all his commandments, which I command thee this day, to do that which is right in the eyes of the Lord thy God. As we come to the final verse of the chapter, Moses brings everything back to one central question. When truth and reputation collide, which one will you choose? Because that has really been the theme of the entire chapter. Not false prophets in the way many people imagine. Not merely idols made of stone, but the voices, loyalties, systems, and cultures that compete with truth for the throne of consciousness. When thou shalt hearken, notice the word hearken. Not merely hear, but listen, receive, respond, act upon. The chapter began with many voices: the prophet, the dreamer, the friend, the family member, the city, the culture. Now Moses ends by asking, which voice will ultimately govern your decisions? Family example: a child reports abuse. Immediately, many voices appear. Think about the family. Don't embarrass us. Keep this among ourselves. What will people say? But another voice says, protect the child. Tell the truth. Bring this into the light. The question becomes, which voice will you hearken to? The voice of the Lord. Within the symbolic framework we've been using, the voice of the Lord represents truth, reality, justice, wisdom, compassion, and protection of life. Not ego, not fear, not public image, but truth. Religious example: a church discovers misconduct. One voice says, protect the ministry. Another says, protect the vulnerable. One voice says, keep it quiet. Another says, bring it into the light. One voice serves reputation. The other serves truth. The voice of the Lord is the voice aligned with truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. Next, to keep all his commandments. The commandments are not arbitrary rules. They are principles that protect life. Principles that preserve alignment. Principles that keep communities healthy. When truth is honored, trust survives. Healing becomes possible. The vulnerable are protected. When truth is abandoned, deception grows. Suffering grows. Bondage grows. The commandments become practical expressions of wisdom. To do. Notice that Moses does not stop at knowing. He moves to doing. Because awareness without action changes nothing. Just like James said, be ye doers of the word, not hearers only, thereby deceiving your own selves. Awareness without action changes nothing. Family example: a family may know abuse occurred. The question becomes, what will they do? Will they protect the child? Will they report it? Will they stop the cycle, or will they return to silence? Religious example. A church may know misconduct occurred. The question becomes, what will they do? Will they create accountability? Will they support victims? Will they change the culture, or will they rebuild the old city? Next, that which is right. This may be the most important phrase in the entire chapter. Not what is convenient, not what is comfortable, not what is popular, not what protects the institution, not what protects the family name, but what is right. A painful reality. Many communities know what is right. The challenge is finding the courage to do it. Because what is right often comes with a cost. Sometimes reputations are damaged. Sometimes relationships change. Sometimes systems are exposed. Yet Moses says, do what is right. Christ consciousness and moral courage. The Christ principle consistently chooses truth over appearance, truth over image, truth over reputation, truth over comfort. Not because truth is easy, but because truth is the foundation of healing. Imagine how different families would be if they chose truth over reputation. Imagine how different churches would be if they chose truth over image. Imagine how different communities would be if they chose truth over protecting powerful people. How many wounds will be prevented? How many children will be protected? How many lives will be changed? Deuteronomy 13 is not ultimately about destroying people. It is about refusing to allow loyalty to individuals, institutions, traditions, or reputations to become more important than truth. The verse is saying, when difficult choices arise, listen to the voice of truth. Act with courage. Protect the vulnerable. Refuse to conceal what causes harm. And do what is right, even when it costs you something. Because every city eventually faces a choice. Every family eventually faces a choice. Every church eventually faces a choice. Every community eventually faces a choice. Truth or reputation. Healing or concealment. Freedom or bondage. And Moses ends the chapter by reminding us that awakening is not merely knowing the right thing, it is having the courage to do it. The chapter ends where every awakening journey eventually arrives. Not at the question, what is convenient? Not what is popular? Not what protects my image? But what is right? Because every family will face that question. Every church will face that question. Every community will face that question. Every human being will face that question. And Moses leaves us with a challenge that remains timeless. When truth and reputation stand before you, when comfort and courage stand before you, when concealment and healing stand before you, which voice will you obey? For the voice of awakening always leads toward truth. The voice of truth always leads toward freedom. And freedom begins the moment we stop protecting the darkness and allow the light to enter. This is the end of the chapter. Thanks for being here, and I will see you in the next teaching.